In 2018, a 19-year-old woman took a babysitting job through a house-sitting app. She logged on expecting a simple job, one child to watch over and straightforward pay. But the family who hired her didn't exist. The address she traveled to didn't exist on any city record, and the child she spent the whole night with had been dead for over 2 decades. The sequence of events wasn't passed down through word of mouth. It was pulled directly from an official police statement. When detectives first brought her in, she passed every initial credibility check. She was sober, she was lucid, and her story remained consistent under questioning. This created the central paradox of the case: a reliable witness whose physically lived experience was directly contradicted by every available city record. The babysitter claimed she accepted a job at a specific residential address and followed her phone's GPS turn by turn to get there. However, data from the app developer's servers shows a dead zone. There is no record of this listing. Her phone's internal GPS logs told a different story. Her device recorded her driving to isolated coordinates miles away. Forensics experts suggested the possibility of digital spoofing, a method where an app's interface is hijacked to show a single user a fake interactive environment. The app functioned as a digital blindfold, guiding her into isolation while her screen displayed a routine commute. Inside the home, the babysitter's memories were hyper-specific. She described the family photos, the warmth of the house, and the handwritten notes left behind. When investigators reached the actual coordinates, they found an abandoned structure filled with debris. There was no electricity, no furniture, or signs of recent habitation. She remembered reading notes from the parents in a well-lit kitchen, yet the physical reality was an empty, decaying room. Investigators considered 2 theories: a psychological hoax involving a staged set, or an environmental hallucination triggered by undetected chemical exposure within the ruins. Regardless of how it happened, her immediate surroundings were hidden from her, leaving her vulnerable during the final hours of the night. The most unsettling part of her statement involved the child. She described feeding him, playing with him, and eventually putting him to bed. Archives later revealed that the child's name and description matched an obituary from 20 years prior. Despite her detailed account, forensic teams found no biological traces, no hair, no fingerprints, and no DNA of a child anywhere in the structure. The case hit a wall because her statement included intimate details about the deceased child that were accurate, yet only a family member could have known them. Law enforcement was left with a choice between a trap orchestrated by a predator they couldn't find, or an event that their forensic tools were simply unable to explain. Without a suspect or a logical resolution, the police file was eventually closed. The incident points to a vulnerability in the modern gig economy: the high level of trust we grant to the interfaces that guide our lives. This system allows for a type of isolation that doesn't require physical force, relying instead on a user's cooperation with an automated instruction. It raises the question of how many of our own daily movements are dictated by digital prompts we assume are secure. The 2018 police statement leaves us with the unsettling idea that our own perception and the technology we rely on to navigate the world can be turned against us. College life often comes down to making rent by any means necessary, and in Columbus, Ohio, that usually means picking up odd jobs. For a sophomore named Kayla Bristow, survival meant working part-time gigs through a local babysitting app. In October 2018, she received a message from a user named Denise M. It was a rushed, last-minute request. Date night, 1 7-year-old boy, just for a few hours. Denise offered double the normal rate for the short notice. Needing the cash, Kayla accepted it without a second thought. The trip grew increasingly isolated as the pavement gave way to a gravel road Kayla's GPS kept trying to avoid. The digital map rerouted her constantly, as if the address she'd been given existed in a blind spot the software couldn't reconcile. She almost turned back twice. When she finally arrived, the house felt frozen in another decade. There was thick shag carpet on the floors. A kitchen calendar hung on the wall. open to a month and year that weren't even close to correct. In the center of the living room sat a bulky plastic CRT television. Denise answered the door already halfway into her coat. She was in a hurry, barely making eye contact, and rushed through the instructions. Bedtime at 9, snacks in the cupboard. She introduced the quiet 7-year-old, Tommy, and then vanished out the front door before Kayla could even ask for a contact number. The pressure to close the gap on a bank statement often forces a trade-off. In the gig economy, the immediate need for a paycheck can override the physical unease of walking into a stranger's home, making the strange feel manageable as long as the rate is right. The evening started out quiet. Tommy sat on the floor watching cartoons and eating his snacks. He was polite, but Kayla noticed he had a strange habit of quietly repeating the last few words of her sentences back to her, almost like he was testing the sound of them in his mouth. Aside from bedtime, Denise had left exactly one strict instruction on her way out. Under no circumstances should Kayla answer the landline if it rings. At 8:30 p.m., that analog phone shattered the silence of the house. Kayla let it ring. It stopped. 30 seconds later, it started again. Then it stopped. Then it rang a third time. On that third ring, Tommy turned slowly away from the television. His expression was completely blank. He looked at Kayla and said, "That's for you, not us." Kayla picked up the receiver. There was no voice on the other end. All she heard was slow, deliberate breathing, and layered underneath it, so faint she almost thought she imagined it, was the muffled sound of a child crying, like it came from deep underwater. The rules of the gig had changed. The quiet house was no longer just a backdrop. It was an active participant in an exchange Kayla couldn't understand, transforming a simple job into a psychological dead end. By 11 p.m., the house was completely silent again. Sitting alone downstairs, Kayla started noticing the emptiness of the space. No family pictures on the walls, no school photos on the fridge, no trace of modern life anywhere. The only personal item she could find was a single framed photograph sitting face down on the mantel. She picked it up. It was a picture of Tommy sitting in this exact living room, but the photograph itself was faded, curling at the corners, and visibly decades old. She immediately went upstairs to check on him. The bedroom door was wide open. Tommy was sitting straight up in bed, wide awake, staring directly at the door. In a flat, calm voice, he said, "You found the picture." When Kayla asked him what he meant, he told her he'd been in this house a long time. Then he explained that the woman who let Kayla in wasn't his mother. Her name was Denise. She was his old babysitter from before.
Tommy looked at her and said she should go home now, because Denise doesn't like it when people stay too long. Kayla didn't process a conscious decision to leave. Pure adrenaline took over. She found herself walking straight downstairs, grabbing her bag and driving away in the dark, her hands shaking violently against the steering wheel. When physical evidence overrides a person's attempts to stay calm, the brain stops looking for excuses. Survival becomes a reflex, pulling the body out of the room before the mind can even begin to process the panic. The next morning, Kayla tried to report the incident. The app profile for Denise M. had completely vanished. When she called the emergency contact number she'd been given, an automated message informed her that the line had been out of service for over 20 years. Needing to see the property in the daylight, she drove back out to the address. The structure was still there, but the windows were smashed and boarded up with plywood. The yard was overgrown. The house had rotted for decades. She spent the rest of the week digging through local county records, eventually pulling a file from 1997. It detailed a massive fire at that specific property. A 7-year-old boy named Thomas Merrick died in that blaze. His babysitter that evening, a young woman named Denise Callahan, was the only other person home. She was never able to get him out in time. Neither of them ever left that house. Kayla never took another job through that app or any sitting service ever again. The digital safety net of the platform had proven entirely illusory. We rely on modern technology to give us a sense of vetting, a feeling of security when stepping into a stranger's home. But an app cannot account for a space that feels wrong the moment you cross the threshold. Sometimes survival depends entirely on the instinct to walk away.